Hello, F Sharp. Welcome back. This is now week 2 of the F Sharp weekly reading, and it's kind of morphing into the new W2F Sharp podcast. We're still working it out. Unfortunately, this week, Stashu is out, so it's just me, but I want to keep the momentum going. So we're still doing it, and we're doing it live. So what are we going to be doing this week? Well, we're going to be reading through the news, and I'm going to be providing some of my thoughts on it. And this is just a way for you to be able to absorb some information about what's going on in the F-sharp community. And I'll just provide you a few thoughts so that you will be able to know whether it's something you want to follow up on and do your own research on. I appreciate this kind of content because sometimes I don't always have the time to sit down and actually read through things. So having something to listen to while I'm cooking for my kids is really helpful. So I hope you find this helpful, and let's get to it. So some things that we got this week. The first thing, and let me zoom in a little bit more here. Oh, a little bit too much. Is we got this announcement around .NET Machine Learning Notebook Series. That's kind of exciting. I do I don't care about your surveys. So this isn't F-sharp specific, but it is part of .NET, and it's the idea of having interactive notebooks for .NET languages. And the .NET Interactive project has been going on for, I believe, a couple years now, and I've been following it. I'm really excited to see it to continue to develop. And it's the idea of taking that kind of Jupyter notebook experience, if you've ever worked in Python, and it's actually supporting quite a few languages now, but bringing that to .NET. And the question might be, hey, why don't we just use the Python notebooks infrastructure because you can run multiple languages on that now? Well, if you've ever had to put one of those notebooks in source control, it's kind of a disaster. So I believe that's part of the reason that Microsoft is kind of looking for a new way of doing it to make something that's a little bit more source control friendly. So if you're someone who likes working in that interactive environment, this would be a great thing for you to check out. I have been following this closely. I'm excited to see where it goes, and check it out if you're interested in that kind of quick feedback experience. The next thing we got is, again, not F-sharp specific, but it's ideas around the ASP.NET and ASP.NET Core migration, and they're bringing some incremental compilation to that. So that could be really exciting if you are working on the web space and you're using ASP.NET. So that's something definitely worth checking out if you're excited about that type of development. I don't do much in the web space these days, so I don't have a deeper knowledge of what's going on here. But if you're a web person and you're using ASP.NET, definitely something worth checking out. Improved doc management personalization for Visual Studio. For those of you using Visual Studio 2022, you'll want to check this out. It makes it easier for arranging all the documents that you have open. I know that the F-sharp community has a pretty diverse range of IDEs and editors that we use. Personally, I use VS Code and JetBrains Writer for the most part. I don't remember the last time I opened Visual Studio, but if you're one of those people, this is definitely something you will want to check out. Just make it easier to keep track of all the documents that you have open and kind of restoring where you were reading last. Resources for F-sharp onboarding. So this is exciting. I believe that we covered this a little bit last week, so this might be a little bit of a repeat. But if you're looking for a place to get started with F-sharp and have some links to some of the really good content that people have created about getting up to speed and learning some of the basics, this is something you'll definitely want to check out. And I even recommend this if you've been programming F-sharp for quite a while. One of my favorite things to do is to go back and watch beginner-oriented F-sharp talks or read beginner F-sharp material, because I've been programming F-sharp for a few years now, and I am still learning little pieces along the way. And so even if something is beginner oriented, you may find a nugget or some new way of doing something that you just missed along the way. I mean, F Sharp is a fantastic language. And one of the things I like about it is that it feels small compared to a lot of languages, but there's still a lot of features in there. So even if you're an experienced F Sharp developer, I suggest going and checking this out and seeing what's there. So definitely worth seeing. The now, oh, we also have the introduction of Fabulous 2.0. I believe that there's another link to that later, so I'm not going to cover it quite yet because there's a blog post on it, but I'm going to get back to that. Let's talk some videos and slides. Well, there's video here, Fast F Sharp, so that's the YouTube channel that I run, where it's all focused around writing fast F Sharp code. I think F Sharp is an amazing language, and people think of it as functional, although, well, is F Sharp a functional language? Yes-ish, kind of. It is, to say it's functional is to kind of limit the scope of what it actually covers. I write a lot of really imperative, mutable F Sharp code for the sake of speed. And so that's kind of what I'm illustrating with this series. And so if you're interested in being able to take F Sharp and push the performance as far as possible, please feel free to check out these videos. And I'm just going to continue diving deeper into how do you make F Sharp go obscenely fast. Close these tabs to the right. A couple more videos now from Zaid, who is just a phenomenal F Sharp developer. The amount of content that he puts out is just mind-blowing. And so these two videos are around web development. Let me zoom in a little bit here so you can kind of see it. So his first one is working with GraphQL. What is GraphQL? GraphQL is this, I believe it's actually a spec. It's not a library, it's not a language, it's a specification. And so there's lots of different implementations of GraphQL. But it's a way of dealing with the problem of, if I have the client and it needs to request some data, but it would like it in a particular form or a particular shape, GraphQL is a way of retrieving that data and only getting the pieces that you want instead of needing to get everything from a web service. I'm, again, not a web-centric developer, so this is not my area of expertise, but anything that Zaid puts out is definitely worth watching. And it's always high quality content, great libraries, great documentation. He's always doing really interesting things. So that's his GraphQL talk. His other talk is about reliable client server data transport for F Sharp web applications. And this is actually really cool stuff. So if you want to know more about the Fable Remoting library and how does Fable communicate from the client to the server and back and forth, this is definitely a talk worth checking out. Again, anything that Zaid does is definitely worth following. And Fable Remoting is one of the things that solved one of the really painful problems for me when it came to writing code. When you have the server side and the client side, they need to communicate, and having to map that data down to a format that could be understood on either side. So under the hood, there's JSON being passed back and forth, but Fable Remoting makes it look like you're just calling F Sharp code. And so if you want to understand more about how that works, this is definitely a talk I recommend that you go and check out. The next one is, well, the first the first video from what you're watching currently. So yes, we already started a series and we're planning on continuing to do this, the F Sharp Weekly Reading. We may rebrand it as something else, but the idea is that we want to be providing the news about what's going on in the F Sharp community, but in a video and auditory format. So you can go check out last week's video if you would like. Next, we have building native apps for any device with .NET and Visual Studio. This is This video is not F# specific, but it has to do with the .NET ecosystem. So if you are interested in doing that, I believe since F# is a .NET language, it should work with F# as well. So feel free to go and check that out. F#, Microsoft is doing a lot to push MAUI and these other ways of delivering .NET code. So this next video is .NET MAUI updates and roadmap. So if you're following that, this would be a video to go and check out. I'd be really curious to see how this develops. Many people have been working on the problem of having a UI that write once, run anywhere, and this is the latest attempt, so we'll see how far they get. I'm cheering for them. It's a really difficult problem, which is why I don't work on it. Last video we got here is a .NET Live, building low latency distributed systems with Akka.NET. Akka.NET is a really cool technology.
A virtual machine that powers the JVM.
If you want to understand more about how that works, I recommend checking out this video. And it uses the actor model for being able to run and deploy applications. And so if you're kind of in that area, definitely worth checking out. It's more of kind of like a reliable web services type of technology. Let's get to the blog posts. So as I mentioned before, we got the fabulous 2.0 release. So zoom in here. So if you are someone who uses Fabulous and you definitely want to check this out, new library out here, and apparently there's been a lot of work that's been put into performance, which is always exciting for me. So I'll probably go and check this out and see what they did to get better performance out of their library. Apparently there's going to be some better support for third parties and extensibility. So very exciting stuff going on in the F# community right here. After Fabulous, we have using OData with F# and Swagger in front end and back end. Again, this is an exciting area. Anything that simplifies the consumption of APIs is something I get excited about. So this is using computation expressions over Swagger endpoints, it appears. And so computation expression is something that, man, how to describe it? Computation expressions are one of F# most powerful features, and frankly, it's been one of the things that's been the most challenging for me to get my head around. But when they work, they are amazing. And so this is just a way of consuming kind of a Swagger endpoint using this library. So if you're someone who's needing to program against web APIs, I definitely recommend checking this out because it will make your life easier. Next, we have real enterprise application with fun.blazor. So this is a blog post talking about creating enterprise applications using the fun.blazor library. And apparently it just went to a 2.0 recently, but has been under development for a little bit. So at a glance, we're looking at what's going on here. Widgets and dashboards, filtering of data. So kind of very, looks like very interactive websites, really pretty graphs, really pretty visualizations. And so if you're someone who's doing things in the enterprise development space, this might be worth checking out. Looks like there's some cool 3D rendering going here with 3JS interop with Blazor. So that's pretty cool. So looks like lots of really cool visualizations and forms type of development. So very cool. I'll have to check this out. This looks exciting. So something might be worth your time there. Another blog post, this one from Compositional IT. So if you're someone who's been working with SafeStack, which I have done a little bit with, not a ton, but it's a phenomenal way to develop F# applications. In this case, they're talking about different deployment mechanisms. And so this is deploying to an Azure container app using the Safe Stack and Farmer. There's a lot of different ways to deploy safe apps, and this kind of goes into a description of the different ways you can be deploying safe apps to Azure. And this is just describing yet another way of doing it, and kind of compares and contrasts that with other deployment scenarios. So I definitely, if you're working with Azure and if you're working with Safe, definitely something that you should check out. Now we get into F# vNext. So these are ideas and proposals for where to take F# in the future. One thing that is pretty niche, and I'm pretty sure is not going to impact you, is the idea of we're going to be removing unused F# compiler service support for compiling from ASTs. This is a crazy niche feature that has not been used in a really long time. So again, probably not going to affect you. I wouldn't worry about it. Another one is difference in compilation time between 13,000 static members versus 13,000 let bindings. First of all, if you have a class with 13,000 static members or a module with 13,000 let bindings, what is going on? But apparently there's a really significant performance difference between these two different scenarios. And apparently if you have the 13,000 static members, that's compiling in 20 seconds. But if you have 13,000 let bindings, that's taking 2 minutes and 30 seconds. So that's a really significant performance difference, and that really shouldn't be the case. So again, is this going to impact you? Well, do you have thousands of static members and thousands of let bindings? If you do, then yes, this will impact you. But I haven't run across code that looks like that, but I haven't seen all the F# code bases. So I'm not a good judge of that. But Don came in and said, like, yeah, this is definitely something that we want to address. This shouldn't be this way. And so if you're someone who has thousands of let bindings, know that this is being taken seriously and is something that they want to address. And it's okay. It's not considered a bug, but it is definitely something that we want for future improvement. So if you care about performance and you're in that scenario, this is something that you should probably follow and check out and help with if you can. A couple of different language suggestions came up this last week. One is a string-focused computation expression and active patterns for doing string comparison. So let's first talk about this add a string-focused computation expression syntax. And so the idea here is that we're going to add a computation expression for working with strings and parsing them easier. And so I don't need this for the work that I do, but if you're working with strings a lot and you're working with parsing of them, this will be something that you want to check out. And what it'll probably be I'd recommend going and just reading the discussion that is happening here, because it's good to kind of have an understanding of what the design methodology is behind F# and how Don and the rest of the F# community thinks about growing the language and enhancing the language. So that would be really valuable just for your own understanding, if you want to understand like how these discussions happen and what the priorities are in F#. So like I said, it's not applicable to me, but I think a lot of developers would find this interesting to see what's going on here. The other recommendation was the active patterns for doing string comparison. Now, this has already been said, like, hey, we're not going to do this because it's easy enough for a user to go and, basically copy and paste this code or write their own thing. So good thing to understand here is that with F#, the idea is that I'm going to say I'm not actually like on the design team or anything like that. One of the things that I've observed of Don and the people who are in charge of where the language goes is that new features should be orthogonal to what already exists in the language. Now, what does that mean? Orthogonal is a really, it's a, it's a highfalutin term, and it's a fancy term for meaning like going in a different direction. There's actually a really specific mathematical definition to it, but it's the idea of like features shouldn't really overlap with each other. Any new feature should be adding a really distinct capability to the language that cannot be achieved by what's already there. And part of the reason that this idea is being turned down is that it is already possible to do this in the language without much effort. And let me unpack that a little bit more. Just because, this is. I want to be precise about how I describe this. You could take this to an absurd degree and say like, hey, F# is a Turing complete language, which means anything is expressible in the language, so we shouldn't add anything more because everything is already expressible. Okay, yeah, sure. But when you want to enhance the language, you want to look at, hey, what do we want to make easy to use? What do we want to make natural to express? How do we want to be able to talk about problems? And if you don't have the right words for expressing your idea, then you might need to add words, add concepts to the language. But in this case, yes, this would be like a nice thing to have if you're doing lots of string comparison stuff, but it's so low effort to add this to your own code that it's not really adding much to the language or F# core, because the ability to say it, the ability to express it is already there, and it's very simple to say. Now, if there's something that's much more difficult to express, like, yes, I can do it in the language, but it takes a lot of effort, and we want to make it easy to be able to express that, easy to be able to say it, then yeah, then that's something that we might want to bring into F# core or bring into the language itself. But it's got to be something that A, we want to be able to express, and B, something that's really painful or difficult to express right now. So therefore saying like, hey, maybe this is something that we should add to the language or to F# core or some standard library. I know I'm saying we a lot. Again, I'm not on the design language. It's just how I talk about it. And another example of this is that, and this was not in the weekly, but there was a time when when the immutable array was going to be brought into F# core, but instead of calling it immutable array, because that's a really verbose way of saying that, we were going to have this idea of, we're going to call that a block, right? So, hey, instead of having to say immutable array everywhere, you're just going to be able to say block, because having an immutable array would be such like a core concept to F# that we wanted to make it really easy to say and express that and work with it. Well, Don has since decided to back that change out because it really wasn't adding much to the language, and it wasn't, I'm not going to put words in its mouth, but the idea was like, it was already expressible. It was already available to the language. So like going to the effort of like making block and making it part of standard library, it's just like, it wasn't worth it. Right. So that's an example of something that was already expressible. We thought about bringing it into the language, but really it wasn't necessary. So coming back to the active patterns for string comparison, active patterns are a really amazing feature in F#. And I'd recommend just checking this suggestion out, and copying and pasting this code for your own use if you needed it, because it does make string comparison easier. But again, it's such a small little snippet that you can just copy and paste it. So I think this is cool just from hey, here's an elegant way to do string comparisons in F#. So I'm definitely going to steal this. even though it's not being added to the language, it's still some great code that you should check out and use and just kind of get inspiration from. Active patterns is something I'm using more now that I understand a little bit more and I understand how it works. And it's like, oh, I'm seeing more opportunities to use it. And this is a great example of how to use active patterns to simplify your code and make it more expressive and easier to understand. Okay, we're getting down here to the highlighted projects. Hire. Let's check this out. So Hire is a library for a lightweight higher-kinded polymorphism. Whoa. Okay, so higher-kinded polymorphism, higher-kinded types. This is interesting. So let me see if I can find the page. Higher-kinded types. Is this? Yeah, this is the article I wanted to. Nope. This is not. Oh man, there's a Scala one. Okay, this was a great blog post that talked about higher-kinded types and why they are useful. And F# does not have higher-kinded types. They're one of the oldest requests for the language is for higher-kinded types, and right next to it is type classes. And this comes from the realm of deep functional programming. And why would you want something like higher-kinded types in a language? Higher-kinded types are basically just a higher level of abstraction. And an example here that they're showing is the idea of flat map. And flat map is bind in F#. And if you look at what the signature is for bind, because you have list bind, you have option bind, you have result bind. So all these types in F# have this bind method, bind function. And with higher-kinded types, you could say like, hey, you know what? I'm going to define bind, but I'm going to define it for all types instead of having to define list bind, result bind, option bind. And that's nice from a higher level of abstraction way of thinking and being able to write more terse, succinct code. So if you want to know what higher-kinded types are about, I will include a link to this article so you can go and check it out. But it's something that's kind of famously not in F#, but there are libraries for doing higher-kinded type of work in F#. And it appears that's what the higher library is. So if you're someone who's a Haskell geek or other hardcore functional languages and you'd like to see how that could be done in F#, I would suggest checking out this library, Higher, for F#. Next project is a template for those of you who are working with Gitpod and Fable React. So this is a Fable template configured for ephemeral development environments on Gitpod. I don't work on Gitpod, but if you're someone who does and you work with Fable 3, this would be worth checking out. It looks like it's just a template for getting you up and started really quickly. So possibly a big time saver if you want to get up and running on Fable quickly with Gitpod. So last but not least, the new releases, Fabulous 2.0, we've already discussed. FS Autocomplete has a new version. FS Autocomplete is the library used to power autocompletion in the F#. We also have fun.odata, which I believe we covered in an earlier blog post. Yep, using OData with F# and Swagger front end and back end. And last, but certainly not least, is this little library that just got its very first release, Fspdf. So this is interesting. I'll go to the project website. So this is a little library for generating PDFs with F#, and it has a nice little DSL for doing that. And this is fantastic. PDFs are one of those things that's just painful. I have never come across a way of working with PDFs in any language that I enjoyed. They always seem to be painful. And I think it's just a product of that specification, just being something that's been existing for a long time. So it's got a lot of features in it. But this appears to be a way of generating PDFs from F Sharp, which if you're someone who works in some kind of business domain and you're needing to generate reports and you want a PDF version of them, this could be something that could be really useful. So it looks like it's the very first release for this. I'm really curious to see where this goes. I'm always excited about something that makes working with PDFs easier and simpler. So thank you for whoever did the work on this. Oh, looks like we got a 0.2 release already. Holy smokes. That's fantastic. So looks like this is in active development, and I'm really excited to see where this goes. So that will bring me to the end. So thank you for joining me this week. I know this is only week number 2, and we are going to be working on getting this more polished and more content rich for you. And hopefully we'll be able to bring some other people on and get their thoughts and ideas, bring some actual experts on these libraries and on these projects and be able to get their input on this as well. And so until next week, thank you for joining me, and I hope you have a wonderful time writing F Sharp code. Thanks, y'all. Bye-bye.